views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
All right, welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a great show today. Two fantastic attorneys, David Otto and Helene Weiss, each with two different and distinct topics. David Otto wrote a book on medical malpractice, something attorneys and I think clients should read so they know exactly what it is when they have a medical malpractice case. And Helene Weiss will be here to talk about the sex trafficking industry and certain acts that are hopefully in the legislature and may get passed. A lot to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. I've been looking forward to this segment for a couple of weeks now. Helene Weiss is here, and we're going to talk about the sex trafficking industry. First of all, Helene, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
This is a hot topic, certainly in the news. No one likes to see the exploitation of anybody in our society, certainly not women and children. Could you tell the viewers a little bit about how maybe you got involved in this type of work and really why you're here today?
Sure. So I started out my legal career as a Special Victims Bureau prosecutor in Nassau County. And I loved doing that sort of work, public service work, working directly with victims that were impacted by a sex crime, by any sort of victim act of violence against them. It was really rewarding work. I moved into the civil sector in late 2019, early 2020, and I'm now working on Child Victims Act proceedings for plaintiffs only child abuse cases. So I moved from doing criminal work focused on special victims now to doing civil work that is solely focused still on special victims, still on the plaintiff side. And what we're talking about here with these two competing bills.
When we're talking about prostitution, hundreds and hundreds of years old. Right. Throughout societies, societies have allowed prostitution to basically exist, right. Be hidden or in different ways. Yet it seems like at this point, our society is ready to change this and somehow bring it out and legalize it and control it. Right? And I guess that's really where I want to start. There are so many bills out here: Stop the Violence in the Sex Trades Act, Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act,
right?
Safe Harbor for Exploited Children's Act. Right. And I guess maybe you can just put some of it together and give the viewers a good sense of where we're going at this point.
Sure. So the United States is a bit behind when it comes to this sort of legislation. Not a shocker. We're behind in a lot of things. But when it comes to being progressive about sex work and decriminalizing aspects of this, we've been looking at other countries. We've been looking at what's happening in Sweden, what's happening in Norway, in Ireland, and we're looking at the data, right? At least legislators they're trying to look at the data and see, how are the countries who have adopted these more progressive bills, either a full decriminalization model, which completely decriminalizes sex work for the sex workers, for the brothels, for the pimps, a complete decriminalization model versus a decriminalization for sex workers only model that still maintains decriminalization for the pimps, for the brothel owners, but doesn't make it illegal to actually be a sex worker.
Is there a difference though? It's bad is bad, no matter how you look at it. Why would we be allowing pimps or brothels or anyone to really not be criminalized? In other words, who's exploiting here? Is it the pimps and the brothels exploiting? Is it society exploiting? I understand the sex workers that we get, they're being exploited. So we want to make sure we protect them. Why the protections at all for the pimps, the brothels, or anyone else? I don't.
So it's a great question. The people who are in support of the full decriminalization model, that's the Stop Violence and Sex Trades Act that was presented by Senator Salazar in Brooklyn. People in support of that bill, which there's a lot more LGBTQ groups, trans right groups that are in support of this groups, because the argument against the Nordic model, which only decriminalizes it for sex workers and maintains illegality for brothel workers, the opponents of that say that's fine and dandy, and we get it, but where are the protections for people that want to exit the industry, people that are actually looking for ways out? And the difference is the Nordic model, the one that decriminalizes sex work but still maintains those. It's illegal to have a brothel, it's illegal to buy sex,
Doesn't let them out.
Right. It actually, so that act has provisions in it that expand social services and opportunities for survivors that are actually not in the sex trade because they want to be in there. It gives them opportunities to get out. Now, a full decriminalization model, it's not really going to do that. So why is that the more popular one right now? Because sex work is becoming something that we're willing as a society to say, look, we're progressive. It shouldn't be illegal for consenting adults to choose what they want to do when they want to do it. The problem is actually enforcing. It's a slippery slope, because then you have kids that get involved in this stuff. And when you say, okay, it's fully decriminalized, well, then the police can't, supervise. They would need a warrant to even, knock on a door and see what's going on. I mean, it's not something that, as a progressive person, I can look at both of these bills and say, okay, there's upsides, there's downsides. The Nordic model is a little bit more of like one step in the right direction. And the full decriminalization it's a little harder for us to kind of grasp as a society how quick the effects of that would be, because it's much more it's much more of a leap, right? Than we would be taking if we just did a Nordic model first, right. Then maybe let's see full decriminalization.
We tend to go in baby steps. I get that.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the acts here.
Sure.
You want to go through a few of them if you could?
Yeah, sure, we can. So the Stop Violence and Sex Trades Act, this is the one that was presented by Senator Salazar. It repeals Penal Law Section 230. So does a couple of things. Decriminalizes the sale and purchase of sex between consenting adults. It eliminates the prostitution statutes that are used to charge sex workers that live together, work together. Decriminalizes sex work inside brothels. It expunges criminal records too for sex workers that have like previous convictions under Penal Law 230. And this is what we've been referring to as the full decriminalization one. Then we have the Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act. This was introduced by Senator Kruger out of Manhattan. And this maintains prohibitions against pimping and brothel owning and buying sex, but it decriminalizes the sex workers' ability to participate in the industry. So this is what we've been referring to as the Nordic model. It also closes a loophole that prevents sex buyers from being charged with promoting prostitution when they traffic people. It also would eliminate the ignorance defense for people who are charged with buying sex from children. The other thing that this
is there an ignorance defense? How does that work?
Well, it's a so-called ignorance defense. That's what
we didn't realize that the person was under 18, or I don't understand.
Right. So for people who are charged with prostitution offenses, sometimes a defense that is used, and it's not always used successfully, but it's a defense that is often used, is this person represented themselves to be, and
21 or 22, and it turns
right,
out 16.
Of course. And so you've got that, you have to have the intent, behind it. Of course, there's like the statutory rape law anyway, but when you've got those really borderline aged children, 16, 17, it's a very slippery slope. 15, 16, 17, those really tough ages where it's difficult to charge a statutory rape, but there's also, an ignorance defense that can come into play that would eliminate it.
Let me ask you, in terms of getting into a courtroom here, in terms of damages, litigation, do these acts, will they help either your firm or anybody be able to bring lawsuits on behalf of those who are, I don't know, in the sex industry and exploited? Does this help, or does it not really mean anything?
It's difficult to say. I mean, it allows the Nordic model, the one that we've been calling the Nordic model, which is the Survivors Justice and Equality Act. That one provides routes out for victims who want to leave. It doesn't necessarily say, if you don't let them leave, you're in violation of the law, but there's options for survivors to get out. There's social services programs put in place. So it's not a bill that's being passed looking to say, how can we be more litigious? How can we protect these survivors?
Which one do you think is going to have the most strength here? What's the one we're going to be hanging the hat on? I know we take baby steps, but
right.
You were placing a bet down. Which one do you think is going to get through, and when?
Again, I would hate to speculate about this, but I will say that the full decriminalization model, the one that was presented by Senator Salazar, is gaining a lot more traction. And I think the reason why is because in New York, it's viewed as the more progressive bill right now, because it's like the complete, it's legal to buy sex, it's legal to sell sex, it's legal to be in the industry. But the question is, how are we going to regulate that in a way that still makes it safe?
And I think regulating it is important, at least for now, before we know what we're getting into.
Right.
Anyway, fascinating stuff, Helene. We really appreciate it. Love for you to come back, maybe give us a little bit of an update of the different acts and how's it going. And again, thanks for being here.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us today a special guest, a repeat guest, and I'd like to say one of my favorite guests. He's a friend. He's a fantastic trial attorney, and his name is David Otto. David, thanks for coming back and being here.
Hey, thanks for having me again. It's always a lot of fun, and I learn a lot when I'm here. So thanks.
And how are you navigating this whole new normal of a COVID world? I mean, I know you still got the shirt and tie on like I do and the jacket, but it's not the same, is it?
It's not the same. Especially you really miss it in court because the courts have been closed, and those opportunities to resolve your client's cases in court. And it's also the camaraderie. You have this the relationships with other lawyers. You get to see them. You get to catch up with how they're doing, how their family's doing, how their law practice is doing, and that part of it. Those connections, you have to work much, much harder, as you know now, to keep those connections, and it's very difficult. I mean, it's very, very difficult. But I think the thing that really is the hard part for me is it's causing my clients to struggle even more. Your clients have been waiting for their day in court for years in most cases, and this has delayed things, by years. And it's very difficult, to tell them that I don't know when your case is going to be heard, and it's difficult. And I really feel for them.
And you do a lot of medical malpractice cases, and these cases happen to be of higher value than a lot of the say personal injury cases or some other cases. Medical malpractice cases can go for a significant amount of money. And I find, and maybe you find this as well, but because of the pandemic, the insurance companies really know they can hold on to their monies longer. The defense attorneys aren't pushing the cases to trial. They don't have to. So it's those cases that the clients are really calling and saying, when are we moving along here? Am I correct?
You're 100% correct. And they're the cases where there's catastrophic injury, that these injuries have actually, in some cases, led to the client becoming destitute. Not only is it a financial strain, I mean, an extreme financial strain on the client's families, it's also a strain emotionally and mentally. And yes, the insurance companies are taking full advantage of these delays to hold on, where maybe pre-COVID, there would have been a good faith effort to try to resolve the cases. And it's just not happening now.
Well, the show has to go on. I'm hoping maybe in the next 6 months, we can start getting back into the courtrooms again. And when that happens, maybe the cases will move a little faster. Certainly the trial courts are opening a little bit, but there's going to be such a backlog. How do we just navigate, in terms of all those cases? Is maybe there'll be a program, a mediation program. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going to have to happen. I think there has to be and I think it's starting a little bit now, where the courts have been reaching out to try to schedule mediations either with the court or with court staff, but it's going to have to happen. And I will tell you, though, that I had a jury trial that lasted about 4 weeks, October well into November. And I was able to take a verdict in a medical malpractice case in Queens. And I can tell you that it was a strain. It was a strain, and it was a strain on the jurors. It was a strain on the court staff and on the lawyers, where a case that maybe
it's not how we want to practice law. I mean,
not at all.
Maybe if you have to get it done now because some of those cases are so old, but we can't continue like this.
No, and when you're cross-examining a witness with a mask on, or you're cross-examining a witness on a video, it really changes things. And trials, as you know, are ways to get to the truth, and there are a lot of hurdles. So I'm really hoping that come spring, things really loosen up a little bit.
Let's talk a little bit about the way it used to be, and maybe your impetus for writing a book about medical malpractice, general negligence. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about what made you decide to take on this endeavor?
I think over the years, and as you know, David, New York has a extremely antiquated and intrinsically unfair wrongful death statute. And by that, I mean, if you are, you or loved one, happen to be killed as the result of the negligence of someone, you're limited in New York to, the survivors are limited to what they can recover. And there is no individual claim. For example, if a parent loses a young child, and we have, I've had cases through the years where, let's say I have a 6-year-old who, whether it's a pedestrian who gets hit by a careless driver and killed, a young child, and I have families come to me to say, we want justice on this for our loss. I can't tell you how painful it is to explain to these families, your child's life has no value. In New York, you're only entitled to recover for economic loss for the loss of that child. And as we know, a 6-year-old doesn't have, is not a breadwinner of the family. So there is no economic loss. And to have these conversations, year after year after year, is maddening. And I've tried to do my best in Albany to get these laws changed, the wrongful death laws. So the impetus for the book was that I have seen my clients through the years. I've seen stories of courage, of heartache, that comes from the damages that come from a wrongful death or a medical malpractice case. So I've seen the effect of medical malpractice on families. So let's say the person who has been harmed can no longer work, is now confined to their home, is confined to a facility, is confined to a wheelchair. It doesn't just affect that person. It affects their spouse, it affects their children, it affects family members, it affects friends. And I wanted to, for my clients, I wanted to write this book to address a lot of the questions that we get, or I would get, when clients come to me to ask me to take their case.
What types of issues do you discuss in the book?
Yeah, like, for example, you may have a parent who comes to us and like that example I gave you where they've lost a child and they ask about the case. And I think it was important because they thought, and most people think, that they would have a case for their loss, for their grief, for their pain.
And certainly they have you have more grief than you could ever unfortunately imagine.
There are no words for that. No, and we're not, as we know, as parents, we're not equipped emotionally to lose a child. I mean, we're just not. And it's not just, and again, I want to be clear, it's not just the loss of a child. It could be the loss of a grandparent. It could be the loss of just someone in a stay-at-home mom, someone who's not a wage earner. It could be even a single mother who is a low wage earner, who's not making a lot of money, but supports the family anyway. You're being judged by how much you make, as opposed to what your life was worth. So in essence, when we explain to clients sometimes about the law in New York, and we tell them that your loved one, their life has no value, it's an extremely difficult thing to accept. So that's one of the things that I wanted to address here. And the other things I wanted to address were the differences in like what to expect from a wrongful death case and a medical malpractice case, as opposed to a general negligence case. So, for example, in a negligence case, let's say a car accident, all you have to show, to recover damages in the car accident case is basically that the other driver didn't act reasonably, right, in the operation of the vehicle, and you have to show that the injuries you claim are the result of that negligence. It's a little different in medical malpractice, where before you can start a lawsuit, you need to, with the lawsuit, file a certificate of merit.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, just with the automobile, that you're not just injured, that you would be considered seriously injured. Right?
Well, in New York State, you have to have serious personal injury.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So you were saying?
So in medical malpractice cases, for example, clients sometimes don't understand that we have to have the records reviewed by a physician, an expert in the field, to tell us, at this point, with this information, we feel there's a meritorious claim. And that has to be filed with the lawsuit, So that's one of the things that, clients don't necessarily understand or expect. The other thing is that when you have a wrongful death claim, technically, since the person has passed away, they don't have any standing to bring a lawsuit. So, someone has to be appointed as the administrator of the estate, or if there's a will, an executor, to then have the legal authority to proceed with a case on behalf of the deceased. So that's the second thing. And another thing that clients really don't understand, and one of the reasons I wrote the book too, was that any settlement of the claim or any action that the lawyer takes really has to be approved by a court, by the surrogate court at some point.
We don't have too much time. We're pretty much out of time. Where do we find the book, and how do we find you?
Well, you could find the book on Amazon. It's the title is Medical Malpractice and Wrongful Death in New York. Answer to tough questions that can arise in your case. I put in there some a few sort of case studies, examples of some of the things, and I also explain about the inequities of the New York wrongful death law. And hopefully it'll be.
Where do we find you?
You can find me. My firm is Oddo Babat. I'm located at 8 West 38th Street in New York.
All right. Well, David, thanks again. As usual, you're the best. We'd like to get you back, and hopefully I'll see you in a courtroom sometime. We could catch up in person.
Yeah, can't wait. Thanks,
All right.
David.
Stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. All right, well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank both of our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or a question you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know your rights, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.